Coming to you from a cozy little condo high atop Old 4th Ward, Atlanta. Welcome to The Ron Show on America One Radio. Here's your host, Ron Roberts.
In full transparency and candor, I had planned on giving myself the rest of this week off, thinking it's the holidays, a couple more days of rest and respite, maybe a little sleeping in. Actually, I've been pretty busy with real estate anyway. Might do me some good. And then I awoke New Year's Day. By the way, being responsible, didn't stay up very late. I think I made it till about 1 a.m. and finally fell asleep. Anyway, awoke New Year's Day to horrific news. I don't know how you wake up and grab your phone to see what messages that's me. And instinctively, I put my glasses on. I check to make sure I haven't missed any messages, specifically after New Year's Eve, right? Been seeing someone, and we went to a house party, nice little dinner party. My friends Ludwig and William had a nice spread, and we had dinner. I feel as if maybe the dinner was too good because we all ate, and we're all like, "Oh, it's 10 o'clock. We're all tired," and we scattered. And I felt bad because I think Ludwig and William, Ludwig for sure, thought we were going to all hang out there and make it to midnight. And when his mother went to bed, that was the first shoe to drop. And I guess not to be unexpected, but yeah. Anyway, waking up New Year's Day and seeing the headlines coming from New Orleans were heartbreaking. It reminded me of the morning I awoke to find out about the Pulse Massacre in Orlando. And the reason it reminded me of the Pulse Orlando mass shooting is because I, at that time, lived in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, also home to a Pulse nightclub, that is an LGBTQ plus club. And for just a split second, my heart sank. And then I had the brief respite of relief in realizing, oh, not the Pulse near where I live, and still finding out the horror that took place in Orlando. In New Orleans, I have a ton of memories. I lived in Louisiana for 5 years. I lived in New Orleans proper for about a year. And even before I lived in Louisiana and in New Orleans, I lived in nearby Mobile, Alabama for about 18 months. Working in radio, you bounce around a little bit. And so for about 6.5 years or so, New Orleans was, if not my home, my getaway. My best friend Daryl lives in nearby Metairie. And so there's always a place to stay, always a wonderful friend to hang out with and socialize with, and of course, the draw of the French Quarter. And the Marigny and the Bywater. New Orleans is just a wonderful city to visit. I can't tell you how many times, whether it was Mardi Gras night, yes, New Year's Eve. I've celebrated a couple of New Year's Eves in New Orleans. It's a great city to be on New Year's Eve. Network television has figured that out because they often broadcast from New Orleans as well as the baby descends at Cathedral Square. I can't tell you how many times I've turned the corner, the now infamous corner, at Bourbon and Canal. There used to be a Crystal on Canal, and a late-night Crystal stop at 3 in the morning or so was often in my destiny after a night of cavorting up and down Bourbon Street. I've turned that corner many times. And to awaken to headlines like we saw yesterday on the attack and subsequent slaughter, the death of more than a dozen human beings just out celebrating the end of one year and the beginning of the next. I just don't have the words. And yet, that's what you come here for. You come here for the words. You come here for the insights and the headlines and the perspective. I'm also of the generation that was there as an adult to witness over television screens, obviously, what occurred on 9/11. And I think on that day in this country, we realized the world is a smaller place and that we are not safe from the ills that we often see splashed on our TV screens watching the evening news from half a world away. We think we are immune to the things that horrify humanity in other parts of the world, and yet it's here. And I hesitate to take this event in New Orleans and speak in a manner of finger wag. We wrought this on ourselves, yada, yada, yada. But there is something to that. And there's no mistaking that the man that obviously became radicalized is the guilty party. And that, as we're learning, there seems to be some collaboration with another, if not others, who as well were radicalized. There are clues that this radicalization somehow happened at the hands of ISIS or an offshoot of ISIS or inspired by ISIS. We'll let federal officials who are investigating this tragedy figure that out. Religious radicalization is a dangerous weapon and has been throughout humanity. That is not a new thing. It's just breathtaking to learn what we're learning about the man who drove a white truck through people with IEDs allegedly in the truck, filled with nails, seeking to do way more carnage than he actually got away with on a corner of a city street that I have walked down many, many times. I have friends that still live in the area, and once again found myself with the task of messaging people to make sure that they were okay, certain that they weren't there. One in particular, a friend of mine who is in the Marine station there, who I love Michael. Michael, because he's a Marine, obviously he is fit as a fiddle. No matter how old a Marine is, a Marine tends to be fit as a fiddle, right? Michael is a little bit younger than me. He's like in his mid-40s, maybe. Michael, if you're younger than that, I apologize. But, you know, a man in his mid-40s who's a Marine, he's fit enough to hang with the fellow Marines who are in their 20s and 30s, right? And so he hangs out with a younger crowd. And I saw, I believe on Snapchat New Year's Eve, a snap from Michael celebrating the New Year. But I believe it was a house party. I can't go back and see because it's Snapchat, but I believe it was a house party. So I was fairly certain he was okay. Still, I awaken. It's about 7:30 New Year's Day. I read the headlines. I check in with my friend Daryl in Metairie to make sure he's okay, knowing that he had a little gathering at his own house, so I know he wasn't there, just to bemoan the horror. And then I messaged my friend Michael, who I was pretty certain wasn't out, but there is the chance he might have been. I want to say it was a couple of hours that went by. And I had company. We were trying to figure out our plan for the day. What were we going to do? Were we going to go walk the belt line? We wound up doing that. Anyway, I'm a little distracted because a couple of hours go by before I finally hear from Michael. And And then I finally did. I wasn't assuming the worst, but it was eating at me, and it was a distraction. And then I'm almost a little ashamed to say this. My attention turned to another reality in this. There was a football game scheduled in New Orleans, New Year's Day, the Sugar Bowl. I'm a Georgia Bulldog fan. Would the game be played? My dad's texting me at this point. My dad and I, we don't hang out much. We don't talk much during football games or a Braves playoff game or something along those lines. We're text messaging each other left and right. That brings us together. It is what it is, right? He starts wondering, to me, will the game be played? I thought, well, I can't imagine it wouldn't be. At that point in time, we knew of, was it 10 dead? The death toll just continues to climb. So anyway, my dad sends me a link to a site that says that the game's been rescheduled. They didn't have a date or a time. But it was the only outlet. I think it was Sports Illustrated, SI.com. But I couldn't find it anywhere else. I don't see anything on any of the social media platforms from either of the universities or their athletic departments. Hold off on that. In any event, my point was, you have folks who are there to cover a sporting event who suddenly find themselves in the throes of covering a horrific tragedy. Ken Segura is a sports columnist for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and while in New Orleans to cover a bowl game, he winds up filing an op-ed in the aftermath of this terror attack. He writes, Wednesday was actually a beautiful day here. Sunny, slight breeze, temperature in the 50s. It should have been a great day to be out wandering in the French Quarter dressed in Georgia gear and anticipating the Bulldogs' Sugar Bowl matchup with Notre Dame. Have I mentioned, by the way, speaking of my dad, he and I did that very thing once. It was Georgia, Florida State, early 2000s. I want to say 2003, 2004. Man, that's a great memory. One of those memories that'll be a linchpin in my collection of memories with my father. We've been to quite a few sporting events. That's, to me, the one that sort of takes the cake. That and Falcons playoff win against the 49ers on their way to their first Super Bowl. That was amazing, too. Anyway, my dad literally drove down through a terrible thunderstorm to meet me in New Orleans. I had the tickets kind of fall in my lap at the last minute and eager to go. He drove down. We stayed overnight at my friend Daryl's house in Metairie. We wandered the French Quarter that day. Just a great time. And that's exactly what this week was supposed to be for Georgia, Notre Dame fans in and around New Orleans. Ken Segura continues, instead, police tape-lined Canal Street, a main thoroughfare of the city. Police officers were stationed in cruisers at downtown intersections. Portions of the French Quarter were blocked off by police barricades. And absolutely worst, somewhere there were families living through nightmares. At least 15 people were killed in what has been judged a terror attack on Bourbon Street early Wednesday, hours into the new year. Additional survivors of the attack were fighting for their lives, according to Louisiana Attorney General Liz Muriel, speaking at a news conference held by multiple government officials. Ken Segura, a sports columnist, continues. There are questions that will have to be answered about how this happened and if it could have been prevented. At the tense news briefing held at the New Orleans Police Department headquarters, City Mayor LaToya Cantrell acknowledged that certain safety barriers on Bourbon Street that were part of an infrastructure project from more than a decade ago began to malfunction not long after their installation. Yet they were still not working this week, with plans to replace them ahead of the Super Bowl here February 9th. Yeah, there's another major sporting event slated for New Orleans less than a month, or a little more than a month from today. Segura continues, you can be sure that Atlanta and state of Georgia officials, with the college football playoff championship coming up on January 20th at Mercedes-Benz Stadium, are intensifying efforts and double-checking plans to ensure a safe event as well. By the way, can I just point out, you in the aftermath may think New Orleans was ill-prepared for something like this. They were actually pretty well prepared. The French Quarter has bollards throughout. You can block traffic with streetcars or patrol cars or those bollards at just about any point, especially along Bourbon Street. Bourbon Street is routinely closed to traffic. Atlanta doesn't have that. We don't have that sort of infrastructure or necessity to do that sort of thing all that often. And I'm going to be honest with you, Atlanta police, I don't mean to throw stones or cast shade, but they are not good at handling the traffic flow in and around State Farm Arena and Mercedes-Benz Stadium anyway. It's always a flustercluck. It's always a bottleneck. The good news is we have mass transit that gets folks from other parts of the city to those areas, but I digress. Anyway, Ken Segura continues, and those matters are all important, but it won't change the priceless cost that has already been exacted by the alleged suspect, a 42-year-old man named Shamsud Din Jabbar, a U.S. Army veteran from Texas, who federal investigators said intentionally rammed a pickup truck into a crowd of revelers. I'm going to take a quick break right here and come back. I want to pick up on this column because Ken's thoughts are pretty profound. Again, a sports columnist covering a terror attack in these United States. When the Rancho returns on America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Incidentally, I'll include in today's show notes at ranchoatl.com Ken Segura's column from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. I do that every day. Anytime you hear me cite something, read something, or you get audio from something, I put that in the show notes. Again, at ranchoatl.com. Thank you for listening to The Ron Show. Ken is a sports columnist in New Orleans to cover the University of Georgia's football game, which has been rescheduled for today, 4 p.m. in New Orleans, inside, what is it, the Caesars Superdome now? Caesars Palace Superdome? Anyway. That throws me back to 9/11. I mentioned, being an adult at that point in time as well, and I was working in the radio industry, top 40 station morning radio host who suddenly became something of a talk radio news talk anchor for, I don't know how many hours we stayed on the air. It must have been at least 8-10 hours covering the events of 9/11. Ken similarly leapt into action as a news journalist covering a multi-jurisdictional law enforcement press conference in the aftermath of the terror attack New Year's Eve into New Year's morning in New Orleans, Louisiana. His column, by the way, continues. Amid all the steely vows that all involved in this attack will be brought to justice, the offerings of thanks to law enforcement officials, the expressions of condolences to the families of the deceased, and the assurances that New Orleans is safe, two statements hit home. He refers back to the state's Attorney General, Liz Murrill, who says, parents got a phone call last night, early this morning, that no parent ever wants to receive. And this from Congressman Troy Carter, who thanked law enforcement and government officials for their work, recognizing that if it happens in New Orleans, it can happen anywhere. I believe I said that in my first segment. We are safer than much of the world, but we are not immune from the ills of a smaller world, a global society. That's what Segura says here. We're left with our sense of safety when we're out in public, having been chiseled away just a little bit more. We'll continue to keep going to games, concerts, and festivals. If you're like me, Segura writes, you'll probably trust in the odds and security protocols and believe you'll be okay. But we nevertheless have to live in the reality, reinforced again by a sickening attack on a street dedicated to revelry on a night reserved for celebration in a city that specializes in happy excesses, that we're all vulnerable when we gather in public settings, even if law enforcement is present and safety measures are in place. It doesn't make sense or carry any sense of fairness. It's just the world we live in, Segura writes. He continues, I was among the thousands on Bourbon Street late Tuesday night, people watching with AJC photographer Hayasub Shin. You couldn't help but notice the heavy security presence. We were gone long before this hateful act was perpetrated, but there would seem to be no reason the alleged terrorist couldn't have acted hours earlier. Segura writes, "We were lucky. The thousands who have descended upon New Orleans for the Sugar Bowl have all paid some kind of cost for this act of evil. Many fans will have to leave because they can't stay for the game, postponed to Thursday. Extra expenses, hotel stays, rebooked flights, meals, rearranged work schedules will be incurred by those who are able to stay. Extra law enforcement has been called in, and an investigation will ensue government expenses that every taxpayer shoulders. Members of both teams who have trained for years dreaming of competing for a national championship don't deserve this subdued setting. The joy that all feel in coming together for a major sporting event have been dulled." Segura cites a gentleman from Lincoln, Georgia, who was there with his family and how lucky they were that they didn't stay out later than they did. But I do want to skip past that and let you read that. Again, I'll have the citation in the show notes at ronchoatl.com. Ken wraps by saying, "The Sugar Bowl will be played, almost certainly. It will go off safely, especially now with heightened security. But we're all a little further away from the kind of world that makes sense and that we want to inhabit. For at least 15 families, that distance is infinitely greater and will never be made up." Again, that a column written by a man, Ken Segura, working for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution in New Orleans to cover a sporting event, and who himself, along with a co-worker, a photographer, were out on Bourbon Street just hours before this horrific terror attack took place. This is The Ron Show.
Call or text The Ron Show anytime at 404-919-2725. The Ron Show on America One Radio.
I want to turn now to a story that we've been following, I would say at least a year, probably longer. Maybe almost as long as this show's been on the air, for a little more than 2 years. The Cobb County Commission has 5 seats, except the Republican Party at the state and, of course, the county level, they're heavily invested in this, would like there to be a little more balance on the county commission. Actually, a little more imbalance, if you ask me. Let's go back a little bit. Cobb County is a bedroom county just north of Metro Atlanta. Very much an evolving, changing county. There was a time in the 1990s and early 2000s when Cobb was a reliably conservative bellwether county. Cobb County used to be the Don't Say Gay County of the 1990s. And because of that posture, was rebuffed by the Atlanta Olympic Committee for sporting venues. Because of that, even in the 1990s, peculiar and ultra-conservative and bigoted posture. That's how conservative Cobb County used to be. And yet, in the last 2 gubernatorial cycles, the Democratic candidate carried that county. In the last 3 presidential cycles, the Democratic nominee for president has carried that county. Cobb County is a reliably Democratic county. And yet, there has been a struggle for quite a while for Cobb County to remain in locally conservative control. The county commission has had a slim 3-2 Democratic majority. And that makes sense because Cobb County is a blue county. Conservatives have controlled the county school board with a slim majority. Even though Cobb County is a reliably blue county. And not to try and merge the two, but you're seeing the struggle at the school board level for sure, enacting their policy to ban books and fire a teacher at Due West Elementary School because she had the audacity to read a book about inclusivity. Heaven forbid. On the commission side, because county commission maps can and are drawn by the state legislature, which has way bigger fish to fry, but in Georgia, they can and will tinker with a county commission map. The GOP-held General Assembly at the state level here in the capital of Atlanta, Georgia, gets to redraw a county map if they see fit. And that GOP-controlled General Assembly saw fit to draw a sitting county commissioner out of the district that she serves. I you not. Let me give you the background from WXIE TV 11 Alive here in Atlanta.
District 2 seat is vacant for the Cobb County Board of Commissioners. That's a ruling from a judge on the Cobb County Superior Court. The seat was once held by Jerica Richardson. Now, all of this stems from maps that were redrawn from District 2. The maps led to Richardson being drawn out of her district. Richardson was elected to the board in 2020. The maps were redrawn in 2022. Richardson argued she should be able to stay in her role until the next commissioner is elected. The seat will not be filled until April, when elections are held for the District 2 and 4 seats.
That's insane. In the middle of her term, the State House said, draw her out. And just like that, the will of the voter in Cobb County, in that district, the district that used to be, has been snuffed out. The will of the voter means dick. Sorry. It means nothing to Republicans in the state legislature. They know better than you what you want and or need. Jerica, taking to her social media, I did reach out to her, by the way. Did not hear back from her. She's got a lot on her mind. She, too, is a New Orleans former resident, in fact, a native of New Orleans. And I'll share her reaction to the horror there as well. But first, to her specific case, she writes, disappointment on this last day of 2024 as the issued ruling on the vacancy case solidifies one of my greatest fears. It is now precedent that the General Assembly has the blanket permission to remove a sitting elected official at any time and for any reason. If you believe in democracy, if you abhor fascism, authoritarianism, this should send shivers. Republican, Democrat, Independent, it should send shivers down your spine. From a partisan perspective, of course, it'll only discomfort those affected. She continues, while the General Assembly should not work to unilaterally overturn elections, they clearly and legally have the ability to, in accordance with this ruling. The future of elected representation is at stake in this state. Not only does the ruling reaffirm this undemocratic power, it also renders the purpose and authority of local state delegations powerless, local law unnecessary, and local calendars a voluntary exercise. A state representative in one area can override a whole group of state representatives in a completely different part of the state with impunity. Then, to know that the co-sponsor of this bill felt it was inconsequential to remove me because I was, quote, young and urban and should move to the South Side to, quote, protect his community and, quote, make sure that the representation matched, bodes an unstable future for this state and is indicative of the fear that has permeated our communities. Trust and believe that my vacancy is but a canary in the coal mine for what is to come, Jerica writes. We have already seen other legislative bills chip away at the essence of the delicate checks and balances that have made our country great. It is a slippery slope that we find ourselves on. And the fact that I am being removed from office this much later than originally thought is only because those in opposition struggled to file a legitimate legal challenge against the county for over a year. The county fought hard to prevent this precedent and stop a government branch from encroaching on local control. Which, I have to ask, conservatives, tell me this. You hate federal overreach. You love to tout states' rights. Why does it stop there? Why does state overreach encroaching on county rights not bother you as much as federal overreach encroaching on states' rights? I have to wonder this. Because I could bring in, for example, let me just reproductive choice. You believe that is a decision that should be left to the states. Our state lines aren't drawn to even out the American population in 50 even little pockets. They're just arbitrary lines that were drawn in many cases a century or more ago. Some of the lines just following rivers. Some of them just drawn by, points of latitude and longitude. I'm just trying to understand. Explain to me why something like that, if adjudicated at the federal level, is federal overreach, but it belongs at the state. But there's no such thing as state overreach when it comes to local rights. I just don't understand this. Anyway, Jerica continues. As an institutionalist, I am quite proud of the county's legal work in defending a constitutional procedure put in place to specifically protect the checks and balances between the state and the county, and the diligence of the community along the way. Jerica wrote, earlier today, I had prepared a statement of good tidings. It was a message highlighting the current state of the office and what you could look forward to in 2025 as a constituent. Earlier this week, I met with the cabinet and the volunteers in the office so we could determine the best way to move forward for next year, despite the court challenge looming in the background. Additionally, a couple of weeks ago, we wanted to make sure the office had someone to tend to the volume of constituent issues that come in, and recruited Megan's successor as the commissioner's assistant. She's mentioning staff members here. Zoe's first day was yesterday on December 30th. The message also gave a big thank you to Megan for all of her dedication, passion, and compassion. The message I had put together was one filled with the optimism that has become associated with our office over the years. Unfortunately, as we were going to press send on that message, we received an email. It would be my last email as a sitting commissioner, giving the ruling ordered by the courts that my seat was found to be vacant when the General Assembly's map was adopted by the county back in September. Jerica essentially concludes this post by saying, I will be reviewing the court order to determine what, if any, other options are available in an attempt to continue to fight for Georgia's republic. I believe the Marietta Daily Journal is reporting that she is now considering legal action to continue fighting to stay in a seat that she was rightfully and dutifully elected to serve constituents in the former district that she was drawn out of by the General Assembly to serve Cobb County residents. She also did post yesterday, again, being a New Orleans native. She's been on the show a couple times, and we rib each other about her being a Saints fan and living in Metro Atlanta. Anyway, she did share her condolences. My heart breaks for the families receiving that phone call this morning, for those that lost their lives and for those that are trying to recover from injury. New Orleans, no peace to be found yet as the investigation continues on. Most of my family have marked themselves safe. For that, I am grateful. Getting back to her fight to continue to serve her constituents. This is not an isolated situation. I hail from Columbia County, a bedroom community outside Augusta, Georgia, that is seeing a similar, somewhat, trajectory to what Cobb County has gone through. And that troubles conservatives in that reliably red county outside of Augusta, Richmond County. To the point that there's open conversation within Republicans and conservatives in Columbia County to sort of rope in a growing Democratic footprint in that county. And here's it's like evil genius. You just can't help but chuckle at the evil genius of this. Seeing that the southern portion of the county has become bluer over the last few election cycles, conservatives there are now openly talking about incorporating the rest of the county. Just incorporate it and hem in the two, actually only two incorporated cities in that county that are obviously trending blue. so that they can't grow any further, so that those cities will be surrounded by the incorporated rest of Columbia County, which would become its own city. I actually went on the Austin Road Show on WGAC, I believe it was a couple of weeks ago, before the holidays, to weigh in on that, because I come from one of those two small cities, Groetown. And the mayor of that city, Gary James, who was a disgraced, fired police chief at some point in time in that town. Anyway, he got his comeuppance. He moved to the city, became a resident, ran for mayor, won the mayor's office. By all accounts, he seems to have done a pretty good job as a mayor. I'm not going to sit here and harp on or nitpick because I don't follow it enough. It's not where I live anymore. Nonetheless, he did openly opine when he recently ran for re-election that he would be the last conservative to serve as mayor of that city. He just put that out there, and he's probably not wrong. He ran in a 3-person race and did not win a majority of the votes. He just won a plurality, and a plurality carries in that city. So that was a warning shot. I'm going to be the last conservative that's going to be mayor of this town, y'all. Last white male conservative. He was nearly bested by an African-American female city councilwoman. Soretta Smith is her name. I have reached out to her. We have talked about coming on the show to discuss this. Is it important? I don't know. I don't want to get too micro minutia into a small town. It's a small town. It's actually a city that's ballooning in population. It had like 3,500 residents when I lived there, and it's got to be over 10, 12, 15,000 now. Nonetheless, conservatives in Columbia County want to surround that town so it can't grow any further and become a liberal bastion. And man, again, I went on the Austin Road Show to discuss this and provide some history because he wrote a column that I just thought was a little on the, bruh, have you lost your mind? That's a little crazy. But I want to share with you what he wrote and react to that. The headline, How Incorporation Could, quote, air quotes here, save conservative Columbia County. Save? Is it under attack? Is it being invaded? Well, it certainly sounds like Austin Roads and conservatives in Columbia County believe it's being invaded. I'm going to give you that column when we return. It's not a very long column, not very in-depth, but it's dripping in some tropes and some dog whistles, I dare say. He actually says bullhorns. He's not being subtle about it. Anyway, I'll give you that when the Ron Show returns. On America One Radio, Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Thank you for listening. All right, final few minutes of today's Ron Show, and I do want to share with you a column as I point out that conservatives, Republicans at the county and the state level, they're not fond of democracy and will do everything they can to suppress it, subvert it, or surround it and snuff it out. I mentioned earlier the news that Cobb Commissioner Jerica Richardson drawn out of her commission seat by the General Assembly in the midst of her term. But I'm also pointing out that there is this budding movement in another bedroom county outside a larger city in the state of Georgia, Columbia County outside Augusta. Conservatives are now trying to figure out how to keep that county in conservative control, even if the population of that county is trending bluer. And it is. Conservative talk radio host Austin Rhodes writes on his column in AugustaToday.com. Big news dropped this week. This was before Christmas. As Columbia County elected officials formally announced, there is no plan to move forward with any attempt to incorporate the county and in one fell swoop become Georgia's 6th largest city, bumping Athens to number 7. You have to understand. By the way, Columbia County is not like packed population-wise. There's a heavy northern and eastern population presence. The southern and southwestern portion of the county is growing as it runs alongside Fort Gordon. And then there's a big rural swath up towards the lake, Thurman Lake, Clarks Hill, Appling, Leah, Winfield. There's just a not much up there except, some campgrounds, some lake camps, and folks who have lived out there for a long time move a lot of space. Anyway, Rhodes continues. County Commissioner Chairman Doug Duncan said in a prepared statement that despite rumors and unsubstantiated speculation, I think much of it on his show, that incorporation is a done deal, nothing in the world is further from the truth. The county commission, he said, is not moving forward with any such plans, nor are Columbia County's state legislative officials. Rhodes continues, so you can close that book for now, but I caution, he writes, Columbia County residents and officials, in the strongest possible language, they will be making a big mistake if they don't reconsider such a plan sooner rather than later. One of the benefits of incorporating Columbia County is that it freezes the physical growth of Groetown and Harlem, literally roping in the bluing areas of the county. Theoretically, he writes, both or either could begin expansion campaigns that could see them annex property all the way to the county line. Groetown does grow all the way to the county line, the Richmond county line, just not in the direction that he's fearful of. Anyway, the cities are both legally capable of eventually growing large enough to envelop anything in the county that is not already located within the boundaries of their own respective municipalities. Oh, no. While such dramatic growth is not likely to happen, you can rest assured that Groetown will soon be led by local politicians that not only have expansion in their sights, but high-density housing developments as well. Dun, dun, dun! He writes, hey, Riverwood, it's a posh area of Columbia County. Are you paying attention? Westlake golfing community. You awake out there? River Island gated community. You hearing this? Those, air quotes, affordable housing developments that your rock-solid Republican Columbia County Commission recently scuttled, one adjacent to Westlake, the other near the intersection of Hardy McManus and Halali Farm Roads, are very likely soon to be popping up like dandelions, weeds, as the newly expanding Groetown and their as-yet-to-assume office future leadership gets down to business. I mean, he's like suppositioning crap that hasn't even happened yet. But man, is he hyperventilating over a dystopian future where liberals are going to control the county. Current Mayor Gary Jones, I did call him Gary James, didn't I? Gary Jones has repeatedly predicted that he will be the last conservative chief executive ever elected in Groetown. The November election totals seem to bear that out. I pointed that out overall, by the way. He talks about while overall Columbia County residents voted a strong 62% in favor of Donald Trump, the voting precincts in Groetown went the other way, with 61% of the vote going to Democrat Kamala Harris. Hand-wringing. Rhodes writes, Mayor Jones has warned for several years that the Groetown liberals, who have slowly but surely increased in number, are not politically passive. They are, in fact, radical activists who intend to assert themselves and turn Groetown into their own, quote, urban mecca. Dog whistles. Encouraging as many subsidized housing projects as they can. Here's the thing. I grew up in Groetown. Forget about subsidized housing. There's been low-income housing in Groetown for as long as I can remember and before then. Groetown is a bedroom community just outside of Fort Gordon. There have been mobile home parks permeating the landscape for as long and before I can even remember. Apartment complexes, too, which didn't seem to bother Rhodes so long as the town was at least controlled by conservatives elected. He goes on, this is where I laugh. If Groetown expands with that kind of political stewardship in place, they will have the population and political power to do every little thing that Atlanta, New York City, San Francisco, and Seattle have done when it comes to housing, public transit, public safety, and, quote, quality of life. Again, Groetown resident, let me just say, there used to be public transit in Groetown. There are people who used to take the trains to get in from Thompson and Harlem, Deering, Groetown, into Augusta back in the day before we had interstate highways or vehicles. It was mass transit, but it was white people. So it was okay. He goes on to opine what Groetown could become if it falls into liberal hands and how Columbia County should incorporate to essentially hem in, to freeze Groetown and the adjacent community, Harlem, from growing beyond their current borders and offering a representation that the residents of those areas might prefer. Again, just a fantastic textbook example where conservatives fear democracy if it's not completely controlled by their way of thinking. More bullhorn rhetoric. If Groetown has the power to expand, they will build housing developments that will attract more low-income voters who, in the South particularly, lean solidly liberal. You can take that to the bank. Yeah, what we're seeing happening in Cobb County right now, it's soon to happen in other counties as well throughout the state of Georgia, and I imagine throughout the South, and we'll be following that story. In the meanwhile, my thoughts and well wishes are with those who were injured and those who lost loved ones in New Orleans. A very grim beginning to a new year in 2025. But I do wish you and yours a happy new year. Back tomorrow, 9 and 5 p.m. on America One Radio, 11 p.m. Progressive Voices via TuneIn or wherever you podcast. Show notes at ranchoatl.com. Have yourselves a great day.